Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew DeSantis,
And I'm Kaylie Shapiro.
and welcome to this very special NYRA Bets video on the road to the 2025 Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks. The Breeders' Cup is over, but the road to the Run for the Roses is just getting started. This weekend at Churchill Downs, we have two Kentucky Oaks, Kentucky Derby prep races, the Goldenrod for the fillies, the Kentucky Jockey Club for the boys. It's going to be a lot of fun. Kaylie, I know, like I said, the Breeders' Cup is over, but this is an exciting time of year because we're getting ready for 2025 and all of those great races leading up to the Oaks and Derby.
Absolutely. I think this is probably my favorite time of the year. You can get a head start, start making your list of these horses that you have your eye on. Obviously, a lot of things can change between now and the Derby, but it's really exciting, especially this Stars of Tomorrow Day. A lot of great horses have come out of these days, like Anna, Rachel, Amanda Loon, Super Saver. So, a bunch of horses that have made a lot of noise. On the road to or in the Kentucky Derby and the Oaks. So
Absolutely. No, couldn't agree more. And just 3 years ago, it's so interesting. Up here in New York, last year, obviously, we had the Remsen, and that ended
mhm.
up being a really key race for really that whole 3-year-old crop with Dornoch, with Sierra Leone, with domestic product, all running in that race, all becoming grade one winners. A few years ago, though, they had a great group down in the Kentucky Jockey Club with Smile Happy, Classic Causeway, and White Abarrio, and all of whom went on to win multiple graded stakes races after that. And so, you never know. Sometimes these fields really come up strong. And like you said, sometimes the biggest stars aren't even on these races because we were just talking before we got started. Mystic Dan was on this card essentially last year, but just on the undercard.
Yeah,
So you never know who you're going to see in terms of that future star and a future Kentucky Derby or Kentucky Oaks superstar. So very exciting field. Listen, before we get into it, make sure to press that like button and subscribe here to NYRA Bets YouTube. We are going to have you covered for the Kentucky Oaks and the Kentucky Derby for the next several months. Kaylie is going to take the lead and do a lot of cool stuff with the Kentucky Oaks and getting you ready for all those great 3-year-old fillies next year. I'm going to kind of take the lead on a lot of the Kentucky Derby stuff. We're going to come together and do a lot of joint collaboration. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. Remember, subscribing is completely free of cost. Just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel. And we got a lot from race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. And we got a couple of special ideas coming up next week for the Remsen as well. So listen, let's talk a little bit about these fields, though, Kaylie, and let's start with the grade two goldenrod going a mile and a 16th on the main track for those 2-year-old fillies. It's a field of 7. We don't have the morning line yet as of recording, but it looks to be pretty obvious that a horse like Good Cheer for Brad Cox is going to be your morning line favorite. Certainly is going to take a lot of money. Interested in kind of what your thoughts were on this race. I know you and I saw a horse like Quietside in person up in Saratoga. A lot of different, interesting horses, I think, in this field.
absolutely. I agree. I think Good Cheer is probably going to be your morning line favorite and it's going to take a lot of money as well. Perfect 3 for 3, two of them at this distance. So this horse is really strong coming in here. And not to mention those wins were very dominant as well. So I can understand a horse like this, especially Brad Cox, being your favorite. Even the number one as well. But yeah, my thoughts on this race, I viewed this as the perfect opportunity with those two horses taking some money to go towards a filly that I've always loved, Quietside. I think that this race is going to be the one for her to get back into the winner's circle. Uh, Last time out in the Alcibiades, she had a bit of a difficult trip. She was running against, immersive, quick kick. So I think not that there's no immersive in here. Good Cheer is a really good horse, but I don't think there's going to be many horses fighting to get the lead with Quietside here. And even if, she sits off the pace, I think she can work out a really nice trip here. The Alcibiades, I think the public is going to look at that and probably view her as a bet against. I think she had a ton of trouble in there. I don't view it like that at all. And yeah, I've
I
liked a
think
lot everything I've seen from this horse. So
Yeah, I hear you. And I think people to that point are also going to look at the jockey change right? Louis Saez riding both Quietside and Good Cheer previously opts to ride Good Cheer in this spot. Tyler Gaffalione now up on Quietside. I think sometimes people will follow the jockey potentially to try to see where they like, which of the horses in the field, certainly the jockey prefers to ride. But I agree with you about Quietside. That's a good horse that can run a few different ways. I mean, Broke Its Maiden coming from off the pace very impressively up at Saratoga. And like I said, you and I were there for that spin away. And for people who don't remember, that was a nasty day of weather. Not just, it wasn't just a wet track, because that's where I think sometimes the racing program doesn't do it justice. Yes, it was a wet track, but it was a really nasty day. It was just, rain was coming down sideways. It was a little windy. It was just not a fun day. And everybody was trying to stay undercover until literally the second before the gates opened up. And so it was one of those days where she ran really well. She kind of put away the competition that was around her. And then ultimately, you mentioned Immersive, who, of course, she lost to next time out as well in the Alcibiades. But Immersive was the one who came from off the pace to get the win in that spin away. Immersive, of course, is your Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies champion. So, and Quick Kick, who you mentioned as well, comes back to run third in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. So she's not disgraced at all by finishing third to those two in particular. Good Cheer, very impressive. I don't know exactly who she's beaten. I mean, I like a horse like Sherbini, who finished third to her last time out in the Rags to Riches, but it's not been necessarily a murderer's row of horses that she's gone up against. So I think I'm with you on this idea that maybe she's a little bit of a play against, and I sometimes can be skeptical when I see a horse winning by that easy of a margin. What happens suddenly when another horse looks you in the eye, and what suddenly happens when you get really tested down the stretch in a way that you never have before? We'll have to see. But I agree with you that that's going to take a ton of money and opens up the opportunity for a horse like Quietside, maybe 7-2, 4-1, 5-1, maybe even in terms of a price.
Exactly. And also the day of the Alcibiades, there was a really strong speed bias on the track that day. And she was dealing with a lot of horses like Liam in the Dust, who has a ton of early speed. Might not be a horse that finishes strong all the time, but definitely, was a big pace presence in that race, as well as Rich City Girl, Immersive, and then sitting right next to Quick Kick and also taking a ton of kickback with the Trouble. So I think coming back here, I'd be really comfortable taking this horse at a price I can't say, because I might take her at a lower price than a lot of other people will. But yeah, I really like this filly. I think, this is the race for her to get back into the winner's circle. And like you said about Good Cheer, she has not been facing, the Immersives of the world. Immersive is the top filly. So yeah.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. Now, in terms of a little bit of a price, I do think it's funny, before we started recording, we were kind of comparing notes and just kind of seeing where, what horses we each wanted to talk about. And we both thought a horse like Sturgeon Moon could be at least an interesting horse to use underneath in this spot for Palo Lobo. Palo Lobo is, by the way, just winning 46% of his entries at Churchill Downs so far this meet. So maybe you want to bet on Palo Lobo a little bit. By the way, heating up just in time for Turfway Park. If you don't know anything about that, just flat betting Palo Lobo over the last 5 years at Turfway Park actually has a positive ROI. It's absolutely wild. So that is a trainer that you can absolutely rely on in these types of spots. And this is a horse that's gotten progressively faster every single time out. Broker Maiden at Horseshoe Indy. Then Lobo runs her against the boys in an N2L allowance at Horseshoe Indy. She finishes second against a group of boys. And then last time out comes from off the pace. And more importantly, look at the fractions of that race at Keeneland. They were going slow. They were going 49-1, 114-3, and she still closed from off the pace that day. Granted, there might have been a little bit of a bias that day, but still, you close when coming from off of that slow of a fraction. I think that's really noteworthy. She's a horse that we don't know if she's gotten that upside yet. Sired by Instagrand, who is a first crop sire, not necessarily known for getting them ready first time out. We've not seen that type of success, but they keep getting better and they're doing well going longer. I think that one could be an interesting price. And same sire as a horse like Key Waden for Chad Brown, who we might very well see run next week in the Remsen.
Exactly. Like we said, I think, we kind of view this as a three-horse race with the two Brad Coxes and Quietside. So, I mean, using a horse like that underneath at a price is definitely, I think, a way to go. Just one more thing I wanted to mention about Quietside.
Yeah, yeah,
It's important to note that, she targeted this race.
yeah.
She didn't go to the Breeders' Cup. So I view that as another positive. I think, a little bit of time off, not like it was too much time at the same time. That may serve her really well here.
Absolutely. And I mean, you and I were around some of the connections of Quiet Side before that spinaway. There was a lot of confidence in this filly. I mean, they have a very high hopes for her. So it's always good to see when the connections are that confident in the
Mhm.
filly as well. And like you said, very intentionally pointed to this particular spot. So I think absolutely is a good opportunity to try to play against the favorite. Well, let's head to the boys' version of the races. The Kentucky Jockey Club, of course, won last year by Honor Marie. It wouldn't be a video if we didn't mention Honor Marie as last year's winner. Instant Coffee the year before that. Smile Happy the year before that. So some familiar names on the Derby Trail that come out of this race and end up going on to do more work later. You saw a horse like Red Route 1, if I'm not mistaken, a few years ago coming out of this race as well. So uh, this is another one, a mile and 16, 4 2-year-old boys on the dirt and 10 horse field. Everybody, though, is going to look right at Jonathan's Way. That's the big name in this field. Won so impressively second time out at Churchill Downs. Uh, Coming off of a little bit of a disappointing effort in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, wheeling back on about 4 weeks rest, basically. But Kaylie, you were reading a lot of stuff, a lot of quotes from Phil Bauer, who indicated this horse is ready to go.
Yeah, so obviously I know it's never, super smart to play a horse that just came out of the Breeders' Cup, and I normally would not go that way. But if you're looking at this race on paper, just for what it is, this is the best horse in the race. So, immediately I thought, maybe I'll play against because he's coming out of the Breeders' Cup. And then I saw his bullet work, and then I was
Yeah,
like, wait, this is kind of interesting. So, yeah, I read some quotes that they weren't even planning on running him here, that they got back home and he had so much energy just being hand walked and jogged, that they were like, all right, let's got to put this horse back to work. So I mean, to hear that is pretty positive. And also, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, that to me, that the whole pace fell apart obviously when East Avenue had a really troubled start,
yeah,
unfortunately. So, and they were saying how, the Breeders' Cup might have been a little bit overwhelming for Jonathan's Way while he was
sure.
there. Phil Bauer said in the article. So I think it says something to come back home and then immediately to start training as well as he is, and to display so much energy and wanting to run after having a bit of an overwhelming experience. I think that this horse might be brushing this off a little bit. And also the pace should be pretty fast in here.
Yeah,
He's a horse that, he can go a couple ways about it. Maybe
right.
a horse like this could get the lead. Maybe a horse like this can just sit right off of a couple other horses and that tire each other out and, make a run up. But I think there's several ways that he can win here. And he's the best horse coming into this race. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile, that pace situation fell apart from a standpoint of not that it fell apart in terms of how fast it was, it fell
Mhm,
apart in terms of the dynamics, though.
mhm.
To your point, that once East Avenue didn't break, I mean, I was there that day, obviously, and I turned to somebody, Alex Henry, actually, who was just on last week on the channel previewing the Japan Cup with me. I turned to Alex and go as Citizen Bull and Gaming are going into the first turn. I go, they can stop the race now. This thing's over because it was two Bob Baffert horses on the lead controlling the pace, and nobody was going to pass anybody, and it just turned into Del Mar basically, just a merry-go-round. So
First.
I think that's a race that looking back,
Mhm.
I can see that being a race 6 months from now. We look back and draw a line through that Breeders' Cup Juvenile in a lot of ways for horses like East Avenue, for Chancellor McPatrick, for Jonathan's Way, where you go, listen, just a fluky race. Something happened at the start, just changed the whole dynamics. I know my dad's got a conspiracy that they opened the gates too soon. Shout out to my dad, but and his conspiracy theories. But like, I think there's a lot going on there. And
Yeah.
Jonathan's Way, you can't ignore the bullet. I mean, this horse clearly is ready to run.
Absolutely, and I wasn't even ever, like, a huge fan of Jonathan's Way, like, so I'm being
Right.
completely objective here, so I just looked at it
Yeah.
and I was like, he's the best horse in this race, and like you
Yeah.
said, they even mentioned, East Avenue in the article saying that, I think they were really confused looking around like, "Where's East Avenue?" Like, this is just not
Right.
the way it was supposed to play
Right.
out, so, I mean, I think he's gonna get the proper setup, in here. So,
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a couple of others though, because I think there
mhm,
are some other interesting horses. We mentioned a horse like
absolutely.
like Tistastic, who's probably going to be your second choice, I would imagine, for Steve Asmussen, coming off a second place effort to a horse that I know you are very high on, Sovereignty for Bill Mott. The last time out in the street sense, this one, like I said, ran second that day and just wasn't quite good enough for Sovereignty, who might end up being Mott's top Derby horse this coming year, and looks to be pointed towards some of the big races down at Gulfstream Park in all likelihood. So, that's one would probably need to take a step forward from a buyer speed figure perspective, but certainly finishing second to Sovereignty and beating the rest of that group last time out speaks well to that horse, who has 2 dirt races and 2 turf races. So a little bit of an interesting muddied form to some extent to this point for Steve Asmussen.
Absolutely. Tistastic was the other horse that I was interested in besides Jonathan's Way. I mean, he didn't have a difficult trip in the street sense, but I mean, and neither did Sovereignty. I mean, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that Tistastic, he bobbled at the start, he got bumped by a rival, just like minor things like that, aren't necessarily a bad trip, but pretty detrimental to a 2-year-old. So I looked at that as well. The horse displayed a lot of talent, and I think maybe you'll be able to get a little bit of a price on him as well. And if I were to pick an alternative to Jonathan's Way, which I'm not sure, don't think I will. I mean, but I would go towards Tistastic, but regardless, I'll definitely be using him in my wagers as well, regardless. So
Yeah. I got to give a shout out to a horse that when the field came out, you even texted me and said, "Oh, your boy Dapper Moon's in this race." I
yeah.
do love me some Dapper Moon for Dallas
Mhm.
Stewart. I have a hard time picking this horse in this spot after fading to fourth behind Sovereignty and Tistastic and Sandman, although finished basically a neck and a head apart behind him. That said, I do think, just to cover this race objectively and from kind of a journalistic standpoint, there is some question about whether or not Ricardo Santana Jr.'s availability is in the air due to legal issues. So that is something to at least pay attention to see if there is a potential rider change on Saturday in this race. And this is one who ran really, really well at Saratoga to break its maiden, but kind of also got the perfect trip that day, beat a horse like Guns Loaded, who we might very well see next week in the Remsen, but then kind of came back and finished a distant fourth to East Avenue and Ferocious and Filoso, who's another interesting runner in this race, and has kind of leveled out from a buyer speed figure perspective the last 2 times out. It does have a nice work leading up to this race, but I think if you're looking at Dapper Moon, I would say more of strictly of an underneath. And then the other one, obviously, Filoso, an interesting horse, but I feel like is also maybe a little up against it from a pace standpoint. Is going to be coming from well off the pace and is a horse that's got a thrilling running style in that regard. But you do worry whether or not he gives himself too much work to do coming for home. Maybe reminds me a little bit of a horse I mentioned earlier, Red Route 1, who always made his run, but maybe didn't quite get there at the end all the time and kind of needed a perfect situation. Now, if there's a lot of pace and it melts down, maybe he's got the right setup, but he's one more, I think, underneath for trainer Chad Summers.
Absolutely. And then, yeah, Filoso, I mean, out of the 2 that you just mentioned underneath at
Yeah.
a price, based on what Dapper Moon has showed me versus what Filoso has shown me, I'm probably going to play with a Filoso maybe underneath,
Yeah.
but both of them are really good options. You're probably going to get a really good price on them. So, yeah, I definitely agree. Another horse that I was super interested in that I think you're going to get a pretty decent price on is the Kenny McPeak horse Render Judgment.
Yeah.
He broke his maiden on the Stars of Tomorrow, the first day, the day of the Street Sense,
Yeah.
in the last race, and I was there and I took a really good look at him. And he was running against this horse, American Promise, that I think is super impressive and probably is going to mature, probably after, he's just getting there right now
Yeah.
after like his fourth start or fifth start, but he chased down that horse in an impressive way. He had a smart trip for a 2-year-old. Like, he showed a lot of professionalism. They were able to save ground. But then when it was time to angle out and get in that spot to finish up, he didn't have a spot. So then he had to, go around this. Like, he just displayed a lot of professionalism if you watch the replay. So that's a horse that's definitely piquing my interest at a price. And also, stat about Kenny McPeak with 2-year-old third-time starters routing on the dirt. He's winning 22% of the time with a $2.62 ROI. So, his 2-year-olds, they tend to run better, third time out. I mean, second time out, and then even better third time out. So I thought that was another positive about this horse as well.
Yeah, Kenny third time out is always really good. Third off the layoff, third career start. He's a trainer. He's an old school trainer. A guy like Lucas, a guy like McPeak, Shug McGahee, they'll tell you a race is worth 3 workouts. And rather than just working a horse out forever, they'll get him into a race and get a race under their belt. And a lot of times that first race back is not meant to be a winner. Second race, okay, maybe a little bit more of a shot. By the third race, we're really ready to roll. So, I think first resort, render judgment, I should say, is absolutely going to be a price. The other horse that I'll mention that I was a little bit high on that's a price is the Josie Carroll horse. He's Not Joking, coming down from Woodbine. Now, the question is, how does this horse take to the dirt? Admittedly, that's a legitimate question to ask, and we won't know until Saturday. But the horse's pedigree would suggest he should be able to handle the dirt. Out of a central banker mare and sired by Practical Joke, plenty of dirt pedigree there. So I'm not really worried about that. Josie Carroll usually does a nice job getting her horses ready coming down from Woodbine for these types of spots. And I think it's notable that this horse really perked up from a Beyer speed figure standpoint when this horse stretched out last time, doing 2 turns for the first time in that Gray Stakes at Woodbine. I think this one, again, maybe more of an underneath play, would need to get a little bit faster. But I think because the horse is coming down from Woodbine, trying a surface for the first time, the horse is going to get overlooked, I think, a little bit. And so as a result, you could see that horse floating up a little bit, and I think could be profitable using underneath in your exactas, your trifectas, sort of a thing. So, like I said, I think it's an interesting field. If you're going back to what you said, listen, if you think Jonathan Way is the best horse, then, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest that he is, then he's probably a single in this race, and you move on to the next one. If you want to play against him from the Breeders' Cup angle, which is an angle you and I talk about, and I tend to maybe lean into a little bit more in terms of just fading horses coming out of the Breeders' Cup, especially on relatively short rest. If that's the case, then you got to toss him. You can't really include him, and because in my opinion, there's not a clear second choice. Tistastic's nice, but he's not that much better than Floso. He's not that much better than Dapper Moon. He's not that much better than maybe a horse like Render Judgment. So if you're tossing, if you're trying to get past Jonathan's Way, then including him and 3 or 4 other horses is not necessarily a profitable way to build a ticket. So just a couple of things to keep in mind for folks who are building out those late pick 5 tickets at Churchill on Saturday. But this one should be fun, Kaylie. We're getting ready for the Kentucky Derby. This would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely super exciting. And also the part of it, like Jonathan's Way, he's the best horse on paper coming into this, but like they're 2-year-olds. So it's just super exciting to see how it can change. Like, that's why I'm super interested in a horse like Render Judgment that, ran a 78 Beyer when he broke his maiden. I mean, if I'm not mistaken. So,
yeah,
I mean, if he's going to take another step up now in his third start, I think that could put him in a place where, if not, definitely a horse that I think can hit the board. Who knows what happens? That's why it's exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the same thing you could say with Veloso, a horse that has just, 61 to 76 to 80. It just keeps getting faster every time out. Where is that ceiling? We don't know yet. they're 2-year-olds. To your point, I mean, you've been around horses more than I have in terms of just being around them on the farm, around the track. Just a time can make a huge difference for a 2-year-old. It's not as if it needs, 6 months off the bench or something like that, and the horse comes back as a different animal. That goes without saying. But you can see huge differences from one race to the next, and it doesn't take a lot of time for these horses in some cases to really physically mature, or sometimes mentally put it together and kind of figure out, oh, that's what my job is. Got it. And just get a little bit more professional.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So going to be a lot of fun. Kaylie, thank you so much for joining me to talk through these two races together. It's going to be a fun Saturday. We'll be at Aqueduct for the Comely. That'll be a lot of fun, obviously. But we'll be watching all the races on Churchill Downs on the TV. And we got a lot coming up next week for Cigar Mile and the Remsen. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. These next 2 weeks are very exciting. I'm really excited for the races coming up and all the Derby prep. So, yeah, it's going to be great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, thank you all for really tuning in and watching this preview of the Goldenrod and the Kentucky Jockey Club as we get you ready for the road to the 2025 Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks. For Kaylie Shapiro, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.